In Chapter 1 of G.K. Chesterton's Orthodoxy, he explains in general terms why he wrote the book. He understands the importance that a writer needs to be clear about two things: what he is for and what he is against. In this chapter, he lays out the groundwork for this. The only possible excuse for this book is that it is an answer to a challenge. Even a bad shot is dignified when he accepts a duel. When some time ago I published a series of hasty but sincere papers under the name of Heretics, several critics for whose intellect I have a warm respect, I may mention specially Mr. G.S. Street, said that it was all very well for me to tell everyone to affirm his cosmic theory, but that I had carefully avoided supporting my precepts with example. "I will begin to worry about my philosophy," said Mr. Street, "when Mr. Chesterton has given us his." It was perhaps an incautious suggestion to make to a person only too ready to write books upon the feeblest provocation. But after all, though Mr. Street has inspired and created this book, he need not read it. If he does read it, he will find in its pages I have attempted in a vague and personal way, in a set of mental pictures rather than in a series of deductions, to state the philosophy in which I have come to believe. I will not call it my philosophy, for I did not make it. God and humanity made it, and it made me. Did you catch any of that Chesterton tone in this first paragraph? Can you hear the playfulness and even the smile on his face as you read it? There's a lot more of that to come. Chesterton's book Heretics was published in 1905. In it, he critiques the intellectual and moral climate of his time. Most thinkers were going in for the modern, materialist, rationalist, relativist, secularist way of thinking. In that book, he trashed these ways of looking at reality. But he didn't really offer much of the specifics about his own worldview. George Street was a British critic, journalist, and novelist, and he and others wanted those specifics. And Chesterton gave it to them in this book, Orthodoxy. And as he says in that first paragraph, Chesterton deliberately does not challenge modern rationalists with purely rational arguments for traditional Christianity. Instead, he uses what he calls mental pictures. Instead of a list of proofs, he uses images, metaphors, stories, analogies, and symbols to make his point. The medium is the message, right? In the next paragraph, he does just this. He gives us an analogy to make his point. I have often had a fancy for writing a romance about an English yachtsman who slightly miscalculated his course and discovered England under the impression that it was a new island in the South Seas. I always find, however, that I am either too busy or too lazy to write this fine work, so I may as well give it away for the purposes of philosophical illustration. There will probably be the general impression that the man who landed, armed to the teeth and talking by signs, to plant the British flag on the barbaric temple which turned out to be the pavilion at Brighton, felt rather a fool. I am not here concerned to deny that he looked a fool. But if you imagine that he felt a fool, or at any rate that the sense of folly was his sole or dominant emotion, then you have not studied with sufficient delicacy the rich romantic nature of the hero of this tale. His mistake was really a most enviable mistake, and he knew it, if he was the man I take him for. What could be more delightful than to have in the same few minutes all the fascinating terrors of going abroad, combined with all the humane security of coming home again? What could be better than to have all the fun of discovering South Africa, without the disgusting necessity of landing there? What could be more glorious than to brace oneself up to discover New South Wales, and then realize with a gush of happy tears that it was really Old South Wales? This at least seems to me the main problem for philosophers, and is in a manner the main problem of this book. How can we contrive to be at once astonished at the world and yet at home in it? How can this queer cosmic town, with its many-legged citizens, with its monstrous and ancient lamps, how can this world give us at once the fascination of a strange town and the comfort and honor of being in our own town? At this point, it's not yet clear why he tells us this story about the yachtsman, but it's important that we have the basics of the story clear in our mind. The man sets off in his boat to discover a new land, but because of a miscalculation, he accidentally lands on the very shores that he left. When he finally realizes what has happened, he doesn't feel stupid about it. He feels fortunate, in fact. It turns out that he is delighted. Going out on an adventure of discovery is exhilarating, and coming back to the familiarity of home is incredible. How good is it then when you combine the two? The yachtsman ends up experiencing the delights of seeing the old land with fresh eyes and newfound wonder. And then the most important idea. This experience is what everyone is seeking actually. To be astonished and at home at the same time. To see the world as a wonder, but also as a familiar place. That's the key. He continues to explore this theme in the next paragraph. To show that a faith or a philosophy is true from every standpoint would be too big an undertaking even for a much bigger book than this. It is necessary to follow one path of argument, and this is the path that I here propose to follow. I wish to set forth my faith as particularly answering this double spiritual need. The need for that mixture of the familiar and the unfamiliar, which Christendom has rightly named romance. For the very word romance has in it the mystery and ancient meaning of Rome. Anyone setting out to dispute anything ought always to begin by saying what he does not dispute. Beyond stating what he proposes to prove, he should always state what he does not propose to prove. The thing I do not propose to prove, the thing I propose to take as common ground between myself and any reader, is this desirability of an active and imaginative life, picturesque and full of poetical curiosity. A life such as Western man, at any rate, always seems to have desired. If a man says that extinction is better than existence, or blank existence better than variety and adventure, then he is not one of the ordinary people to whom I am talking. If a man prefers nothing, I can give him nothing. But nearly all people I have ever met in this Western society in which I live would agree to the general proposition that we need this life of practical romance. The combination of something that is strange and something that is secure. We need so to view the world as to combine the idea of wonder and the idea of welcome. We need to be happy in this wonderland without once being merely comfortable. It is this achievement of my creed that I shall chiefly pursue in these pages. In this paragraph, Chesterton makes clear the central purpose of this book. He starts by explaining that he is not going to prove his philosophy, his faith, from every possible angle. He's going to explain it from one side. And that one standpoint comes straight out of the analogy of the yachtsman. He's going to start with the assumption that people need a balance between the familiar and the unfamiliar. He says the same thing many times in different ways, like strange and secure, wonder and welcome. He calls this the life of practical romance. This is the kind of life that embraces both the fascinating and the familiar of the world. For almost everyone, true contentment lies in the interplay of wonder and welcome, where one is both astonished by the world and at home in it. Wonder and welcome. These are what Chesterton says that he has discovered in Orthodox Christianity. And to anticipate his argument, the presence of these two things testify to the truth of traditional Christian faith. But I have a peculiar reason for mentioning the man in the yacht who discovered England. For I am that man in a yacht. I discovered England. I do not see how this book can avoid being egotistical. And I do not quite see, to tell the truth, how it can avoid being dull. Dullness will, however, free me from the charge which I most lament. The charge of being flippant. Mere light sophistry is the thing that I happen to despise most of all things. And it is perhaps a wholesome fact that this is the thing of which I am generally accused. I know nothing so contemptible as a mere paradox, a mere ingenious defense of the indefensible. If it were true, as it has been said, that Mr. Bernard Shaw lived upon paradox, then he ought to be a mere commonplace millionaire. For a man of his mental activity could invent a sophistry every 6 minutes. It is as easy as lying, because it is lying. The truth is, of course, that Mr. Shaw is cruelly hampered by the fact that he cannot tell any lie unless he thinks it is the truth. I find myself under the same intolerable bondage. I never in my life said anything merely because I thought it was funny. Though, of course, I have had ordinary human vainglory, and may have thought it funny because I had said it. It is one thing to describe an interview with a gorgon or a griffin, a creature who does not exist. It is another thing to discover that the rhinoceros does exist, and then take pleasure in the fact that he looks as if he didn't. One searches for truth, but it may be that one pursues instinctively the more extraordinary truths. And I offer this book with the heartiest sentiments to all the jolly people who hate what I write, and regard it, very justly for all I know, as a piece of poor clowning or a single tiresome joke. So Chesterton is the yachtsman. I like the self-deprecating tone he takes here. He is the one who discovered something by mistake. So he's not bragging about how insightful he is. He disarms the reader by depicting himself as a comic figure. And then, more self-deprecation. He explains that because this book is about his journey, it will necessarily be about him. And so he figures it will probably be boring. But he says there are worse things than being boring. Being flippant is worse. That's cracking jokes for the sole purpose of being considered funny. Apparently he is frequently accused of being flippant, but he assures us that he is not. You can already see in just 3 paragraphs that Chesterton is witty. But wit has 2 parts. It's clever, but it's also true. Flippancy lacks the truth dimension. Chesterton is not flippant, he is witty. He never says something just to be thought clever. He tells the truth, and it often comes out as clever. That metaphor about the rhinoceros reinforces a key theme of orthodoxy. That the ordinary world, and ordinary truth, can be as wondrous as any fantastic story. Earlier he asked how we can be at once astonished at the world and yet at home in it. And here he's demonstrating that idea. If you actually look at it, an actual rhinoceros is as wondrous a thing as a mythological and imaginary gorgon or griffin. We are used to rhinoceroses, and that's why we have forgotten that they are extraordinary. Or if this book is a joke, it is a joke against me. I am the man who, with the utmost daring, discovered what had been discovered before. If there is an element of farce in what follows, the farce is at my own expense. For this book explains how I fancied I was the first to set foot in Brighton, and then found I was the last. It recounts my elephantine adventures in pursuit of the obvious. No one can think my case more ludicrous than I think it myself. No reader can accuse me here of trying to make a fool of him. I am the fool of this story, and no rebel shall hurl me from my throne. I freely confess all the idiotic ambitions of the end of the 19th century. I did, like all other solemn little boys, try to be in advance of the age. Like them, I tried to be some 10 minutes advance of the truth, and I found that I was 1800 years behind it. I did strain my voice with a painfully juvenile exaggeration in uttering my truths, and I was punished in the fittest and funniest way. For I have kept my truths, but I have discovered, not that they were not truths, but simply that they were not mine. I was really in the ludicrous position of being backed up by all Christendom. It may be, heaven forgive me, that I did try to be original, but I only succeeded in inventing all by myself an inferior copy of the existing traditions of civilized religion. The man from the yacht thought that he was the first to find England. I thought I was the first to find Europe. I did try to found a heresy of my own, and when I put the last touches to it, I discovered that it was orthodoxy. Chesterton employs more irony and self-mockery here. He describes his intellectual journey as a joke against himself. He thought he was striking out into unexplored intellectual territory, only to discover he had arrived where others had been all along. This self-deprecating tone isn't just for laughs. It's part of his deeper argument, that the truths he discovered through modern doubt and questioning were the very truths that Christianity had preserved for centuries. But I also think he's taking a shot at his materialist, rationalist, modern contemporaries. They too have set out in a search of something new. They too have all the idiotic ambitions of the end of the 19th century. They have walked away from the traditional ideas inherited from Christianity. He is implying that what he now identifies as his foolishness is theirs as well. And he's teasing them because they have not yet discovered this error. Chesterton relishes irony and paradox. He tried to invent a heresy and found out it was orthodoxy. This reversal is key to his argument. The very thing that seemed outdated or restrictive, Christian orthodoxy, turns out to be startling, robust, and liberating. It may be that somebody will be entertained by the account of this happy fiasco. It might amuse a friend or an enemy to read how I gradually learnt from the truth of some stray legend or from the falsehood of some dominant philosophy things that I might have learnt from my catechism, if I had ever learnt it. There may or may not be some entertainment in reading how I found at last in an anarchist club or a Babylonian temple what I might have found in the nearest parish church. If anyone is entertained by learning how the flowers of the field, or the phrases in an omnibus, the accidents of politics, or the pains of youth came together in a certain order to produce a certain conviction of Christian orthodoxy, he may possibly read this book. But there is in everything a reasonable division of labor. I have written the book, and nothing on earth would induce me to read it. In this paragraph, Chesterton points out the irony that he went all over the place, listened to radicals and pagans to learn new things. Oh, and he ended up discovering the foundational truths of the universe. But it turns out that they were the same truths that he could have found out if he had just paid more attention in Sunday school. I add one purely pedantic note, which comes, as a note naturally should, at the beginning of the book. These essays are concerned only to discuss the actual fact that the central Christian theology, sufficiently summarized in the Apostles' Creed, is the best root of energy and sound ethics. They are not intended to discuss the very fascinating but quite different question of what is the present seat of authority for the proclamation of that creed. When the word orthodox is used here, it means the Apostles' Creed, as understood by everybody calling himself Christian until a very short time ago, and the general historic conduct of those who held such a creed. I have been forced by mere space to confine myself to what I have got from this creed. I do not touch the matter much disputed among modern Christians of where we ourselves got it. This is not an ecclesiastical treatise, but a sort of slovenly autobiography. But if anyone wants my opinions about the actual nature of the authority, Mr. G.S. Street has only to throw me another challenge, and I will write him another book. Chesterton here tacks on a technical, fussy little detail. As he shows us that the truths contained in Orthodox Christianity produces the most livable and coherent worldview, he will not be touching on anything having to do with the authority in the church. Chesterton's Christian audiences had opinions about this depending on which denomination they belonged to, and he's not going to go there. This book is just simply a defense of the basics of Christianity, the things that every Christian believes and has believed since the beginning. The groundwork is done. He's explained the why of the book, his surprising discovery of orthodoxy. In the next chapter, he explores how modern thinking goes astray, and why the Christian view of reality, paradoxical though it seems, keeps one sane. The next chapter is called The Maniac. Thank you, and we will see you there.